Welcome back to Rod's Radios. Look at this beauty. It's a Grundig Satellit 2400 from around 1980. And it's a very fine piece of radio workmanship. There's lots of buttons and knobs on it, as you can see. It's a world radio, I suppose, because of all the wave bands on it. It's got FM, long, medium, and then 6 shortwave bands. And the controls on the front are volume, balance, treble and bass. There's switches for between radio and an input, mono stereo button, a muting button, automatic frequency control. As well as the manual dial across the front here, it also has a digital readout that corresponds to the setting here for each individual band. And there's a field strength meter which doubles up as a battery indicator. Waveband switch between long, medium and shortwave 1, and then a separate switch for the second to 6th shortwave bands. Then across the bottom you've got controls. This is a beat frequency oscillator for the single sideband operation. There's also an automatic volume control here, and there again, this is the mode switch for the single sideband operation. And then you have a control that varies between stereo and super stereo, whatever that is. Now, unfortunately, the 4 switches along here, the covers are broken and missing. The first one is the actual power on-off switch. The second one switches the tweeter speakers, which are in here, off. There's a switch here to momentarily check the battery condition, and finally there's one marked as counter, so I'm not sure what that one is. But the condition of this radio is pretty good from outward appearances. Okay, it's a little bit grubby, but that's not a problem. We can clean that up. So the next thing, also there's a little bit of rust on the chrome fittings here, but we can clean that up, I'm sure. Oh yeah, the other thing is the switches on the top of the radio here are preset switches for up to 6 FM selections. And then finally just a switch between FM and AM. And of course you've got the telescopic aerial, which unfortunately the top button is broken off and missing, but we can fix that. The main control on the front is the vernier tuning knob, and this is made up of 2 sections. The inner section provides a coarse tuning, which will be indicated on the dial up here, but also digitally along here. And then there's a very fine tuning from the outer knob, which allows you to crucially tune into those very close together shortwave stations. However, I do notice that when you come to this point in the control, the needle on the top sticks, so that's going to need some attention. Let's have a look around the back. So around the back there are a couple of more items to mention. There is a control here for the aerial, I think the tuning of the aerial. There's a separate socket for an external aerial, and there's a switch here for DX and local to switch between high strength and weak signals. And then across here we've got the presets that correspond to the buttons on the top here for tuning in each individual FM station that you want to pre-program. Then over on this side you have various sockets for tape input, phono input, 2 extension speaker sockets, the mains coming in, which is a common figure of 8 plug and socket arrangement, and a separate socket here for an input of 16 volts DC. So I presume that was a separate power supply that you could plug in. And then of course you've got the battery compartment here, which unfortunately when I take it out exposes the fact that there is a considerable amount of degradation. These battery controls are all rusty, and you can see actually where there was possibly some leakage of battery acid at some stage, so that's a pity, but we'll take that as we find it. And you can also see some evidence of leakage along the bottom edge here. So This should be an interesting job. Let's open the back and see what's inside. With the back off the radio, I can see at a glance that everything appears to be intact. There's no sign of breakages or anything like that. However, there is further signs of degradation down here on the can of what I presume is the IF section. You can see also the battery contacts are still pretty rusty here. Hopefully that hasn't done any further damage to the board itself and the tracks. So the next plan is to actually switch this on and see what happens. Well, the moment of truth arrives. I plugged it in via the dim bulb limiter here in the workshop, and let's see what happens when I switch it on. Nothing. Oh yeah, I have this switch between phono, so I'll switch it on to radio. And it lights up and the digital readout appears, which is a good sign. Turn up the volume. Hum, but only from one channel. There's nothing coming out of the right hand side, and there's this noisy crackling coming out of the left hand side. Tuning on the VHF FM band, nothing. Still only loud crackling noises. Try some of the other bands. Nothing, unfortunately. Oh, there's some sound. Hey, that's good. Very noisy. 691 is Radio 5 over in the UK. When I turn down the volume, the crackling disappears. Still nothing from the right hand side. Anyway, we're getting some signs of life. I'll try it on FM again. Nothing at all. So further investigation is needed. Certainly to get the right hand channel working, but also to find out what's causing this crackling sound and basically lack of reception, or very little anyway. So onwards and upwards. Looking at the circuit diagram now, this part is the audio output stage. I've already identified around here that everything is working in terms of the speakers, so there's nothing wrong with the speakers, and I've gone back as far as the socket for the headphones, which is this one here, and the auxiliary output speaker sockets as well. So everything is fine in terms of the speakers. Now I know that one of these channels isn't working, and I've identified that it's this one up here. So there's no sound coming through from here, audio at least, and there is audio coming through on this channel, albeit quite noisy intermittently. So the next thing I'm going to do is to go back further here to this area here and inject an audio signal here and monitor it at this point here, because we know there's nothing coming out here. So to see if there's something coming out at this point here and this point here on either channel, this control in between being the balance control. So I'm going to scope it at this point and inject a signal at this point here with the mono switch switched on, so that the same signal goes through both channels, to see what happens. So the signal generator is set up here for an audio signal of 600 Hertz, and I'm going to put in 10 millivolts peak to peak and feed it into the beginning of the preamp, the audio preamp, and scope it over here on the oscilloscope on both channels left and right. And here on the chassis, the scope probes and the signal generator probe is set up to see what happens. And here we have the two traces on the oscilloscope left and right channel, and you can see quite clearly the noise coming through on the yellow channel, whereas the purple channel is reasonably clear, Having looked at the scope, we can now see that I'm getting a very noisy signal at this point here, and a clean signal at this point up here. So this section here is working okay, and this section is producing noise. I'm sure, or I'm nearly sure anyway, that it's probably one of these two transistors here. So when I get a chance, if I get a chance to take the board out, because it looks pretty complicated, I'll certainly replace those two transistors first of all. Other than that, it might be a noisy capacitor, but the likelihood is it's these two transistors because it is intermittent. The other thing it tells me too, that this channel here is working perfectly. So I know there's no signal coming out here, and the chances are that the chip here is faulty on this channel. So let's take it from here. I've ordered up the output audio chip for one of the channels that isn't working. It's this one here behind the heatsink. It's a TDA 1037, and this is going to take some weeks to arrive, so I'll just have to be patient. And it's going to be really tricky to remove and replace because, first of all, it has this big heatsink on it, but secondly, on the other side it's covered by this other board here, which is going to have to be removed in total just to get at the printed side. So that's going to be interesting. I will of course check the capacitors associated with this output chip just in case there's something else happening there. But this is the next stage of the repair, I think. The channel that is working, albeit with distortion, has the suspect transistors mounted in here, so this panel is going to come out anyway. And again, like the output chip on the other channel, I've ordered these parts to come in from China, but nowadays these deliveries take about 6 to 8 weeks to come in, so nothing's going to happen very much in the short term. The button covers like this one that are missing over these 4 switches here need to be fabricated, so this is where I'm going to contact my daughter. Stand by for a special message. Good morning, Agent Hunt. Your mission today, should you wish to accept it, is to design some button covers for my latest radio project. I'll show you what I mean. This is the section of the radio where 4 of the switch shafts have been broken off. And here you can see another area with a switch shaft exposed, the button cover having been taken off it. And over here, I've put the switch cover back on to show you the movement of the switch as you move it up and down. And here are some various shots of the button cover itself that hopefully you may be able to design for me. So Holly, if you could help me out with this design work, it would be fantastic. I can probably get these made over here in that the library now has a 3D printer. Perhaps this could be a project, a small project for your maker mates even. Either way, thanks very much for helping out. And by the way, this YouTube video will self-destruct in 10 years. Okay, enough of that nonsense. I think I'll curtail this episode at this point because it's dragged on a little bit and it's going to take a while before I get a chance to do the next part of the repair. So if you have been, thanks for watching and see you soon.